Hey friends, it's Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. This video is going to be a little bit different in that it's the start of a new series that I thought it would be fun to do, and that is Fact versus Fiction, where I take a historical fiction novel and compare it to the actual historical events that inspired it. If you are a connoisseur of historical fiction, you might find yourself wondering how accurate the books are to the actual historical event, and for me, I very much love history. I think staying accurate to what actually happened is important insofar as you are able, so that's kind of what inspired me to make this new series. This is the first video in that series, and don't worry, I haven't forgotten about Hyper Hate, it's still happening. But I recently read a historical fiction book and decided that it would be interesting to explore in this video, and that is The Lindbergh Nanny by Mariah Fredericks. Now before we get into this, I just want to say that I am by no means in any way an expert on this particular case, so bear that in mind. I will also leave the Wikipedia article linked down below if you'd like to read more about this, and I believe that the FBI has a webpage on it as well. This book follows Betty Gow, who was the real-life Lindbergh nanny. She was tasked with caring for Charles Lindbergh Jr., who tragically was kidnapped and later found murdered, and this was a very high-profile case and even led to the enacting of a federal law. This book explores the events leading up to this case and what happened from a human point of view. It focuses more on how the crime impacts the various characters rather than an analytical investigation of the crime itself and who perpetrated it. I thought when I went into this book that it would focus a little bit more on the crime, seeing as how important it is, but instead it humanizes everybody involved, which is not a bad thing. I think that's very important, but it did leave me with some questions, and so because I didn't know a lot about this case, I went and looked up some information on it, which I'm going to share with you now. I've got my notes here because there's no way I could memorize all of this stuff. And I'm going to balance my laptop on my knee, so hopefully this works out okay. It wasn't the original plan, but I couldn't find anything else to put this laptop on. So, let's begin. On March 1st, 1932, Charles Augustus Lindbergh Jr., the 20-month-old son of aviators Charles Lindbergh and Anne Morrow Lindbergh, was abducted from his crib in the upper floor of the Lindbergh's home. His body was later discovered by the side of a road on May 12th by a truck driver. In September, a German immigrant named Bruno Richard Hauptmann was arrested for the crime. The trial lasted from January 2nd to February 13th, 1935, and found him guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death in the electric chair. He continued to profess his innocence, but all appeals failed and the sentence was carried out on April 3, 1936. As a result of this case, Congress passed the Federal Kidnapping Act, commonly referred to as the Little Lindbergh Law, which makes transporting a kidnapping victim across state lines a federal crime. So let's begin with the kidnapping itself. At approximately 10 p.m. on March 1, 1932, Betty Gow, the titular Lindbergh nanny, found that Charlie was not with his mother, who had just come out of the bathtub. Betty then alerted Charles Lindbergh, who immediately went to the child's room. There they found a ransom note in an envelope on the sill. Lindbergh then took Ollie Whately, the butler, with him around the house and grounds, and the two of them found impressions in the ground under the window of the baby's room, pieces of a wooden ladder, and a baby's blanket. The police were then called. Hopewell Borough Police and New Jersey State Police conducted an extensive search of the house and grounds. A fingerprint expert examined the ransom note and letter, but no usable fingerprints or footprints were located, which led experts to conclude that the kidnappers wore gloves and some type of cloth on the soles of their shoes. No adult fingerprints, strangely, were found in the baby's room, including areas that the witnesses admitted to touching, such as the window, but Charlie's fingerprints were found. The ransom note itself contained bad grammar, which would later be used as an explanation for Hauptmann's guilt. People claimed it was written by an immigrant because of the bad spelling, and people in the book even claimed that the person wrote like someone who spoke German. This reminds me a lot of the Ripper letters. If you don't know what those were a bunch of fraudulent letters that were written to the police during the Jack the Ripper killings, and they claimed to all be from the Ripper himself, and they were filled with bad grammar and misspellings, and this doesn't necessarily mean that it's an uneducated person or somebody who's not familiar with English. More often than not, it seems to be that this is somebody who's trying to obfuscate things and just confuse people, but apparently in this particular case, the police bought that explanation. It must be an immigrant who wrote this note. The note itself was a bit strange. It had these weird symbols, which I will show. Violet Sharp, who was a maid in the Lindbergh household, was a suspect in the book and in real life, and on June 10th she committed suicide before she could be questioned for the fourth time. Her involvement was later ruled out due to her having an alibi for the night in question. In the book, this is very strange the way that this is portrayed. Violet's acting very suspicious and she doesn't want to answer these questions, even though if she's innocent it shouldn't be hard to do so. I don't know for certain what she did or didn't say to the police in real life, but it seems strange that the way it was portrayed in the book. It felt like she was trying to hide something in the book, whereas if you just read that she was being interrogated by the police and then ended up taking her own life, it felt like she was being railroaded and they were just basically trying to search for a suspect and pin it on whoever they could, but I really don't know what led to this series of events. Then we come to John Condon. I include this individual because he plays a role in the book, just as he did in real life, and I find him just very suspicious as a whole. Condon was a retired schoolteacher and offered $1,000 if the kidnapper returned Charlie to a Catholic priest. Condon allegedly received a letter written by the kidnappers authorizing him to be their liaison with the Lindberghs. Lindbergh accepted this letter as genuine. Following the kidnappers' instructions, Condon placed a classified ad in the newspaper that read, "Money is ready, Jaffsey." He then waited for further instructions. A meeting between Jaffsey and a representative from the group claiming to be the kidnappers was scheduled for one late evening at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx. According to Condon, the man sounded foreign but remained in the shadows throughout the conversation, so Condon was unable to get a good look at his face. The man claimed his name was John, that he was a Scandinavian sailor, part of a gang of 3 men and 2 women. Charlie, he claimed, was being held on a boat, unharmed, but would be returned only for ransom. When Condon expressed doubt that John really had Charlie, the man promised the kidnapper would return Charlie's sleeping suit as proof. John then allegedly asked Condon, "Would I burn if the package were dead?" When questioned further, he assured Condon that the baby was still alive. On March 16th, Condon received a toddler sleeping suit in the mail, along with a 7th ransom note. Lindbergh identified the sleeping suit as being Charlie's. Condon then placed another ad in the newspaper and received a letter saying it was time for the ransom to be delivered. The money was placed in a wooden box that was custom-made in the hopes that it could be identified later. It also contained gold certificates that were about to be withdrawn from circulation. The bills were not marked, but the serial numbers were recorded. Condon passed the money off to John, who accepted it and told Condon that Charlie was in the care of 2 innocent women. Unfortunately, that was not the case, because Charlie's body was discovered on the side of a road on May 12th by a truck driver only about 4.5 miles from the Lindbergh home. The skull was badly fractured, and the body had decomposed, with evidence of scavenging by animals and an attempt at a hasty burial. In June 1932, investigators began to suspect those within the house employed by the Lindberghs. After suspicion fell upon Violet, she died by ingesting a silver polish that contained cyanide. After her alibi was later confirmed, the police were criticized for being heavy-handed with her. As for tracking the ransom money, it didn't prove successful. Some of the ransom bills were spent in Chicago and Minneapolis, but the spenders were never found. Days before gold certificates were to be exchanged for other bills, a man claiming to be J.J. Faulkner of 537 West 149th Street exchanged $2,980 in a Manhattan bank. These bills were from the ransom, but no one named Faulkner lived at that address, and the man was never found. Now we come to Hauptmann. On September 18, 1934, a Manhattan bank teller located a gold certificate from the ransom, which had a license plate number penciled in the margins, allowing it to be traced to a nearby gas station. That gas station manager had written down the number because he thought his customer was acting suspicious and could possibly be a counterfeiter. The license plate belonged to a vehicle owned by Richard Hauptmann, an immigrant with a criminal record in Germany. When Hauptmann was arrested, he was carrying a single $20 gold certificate, and over $14,000 of the ransom money was found in his garage. He claimed during interrogation, which did involve beatings, that the money and other items were left by him by his friend and former business partner, who had died shortly after returning to Germany. Hauptmann claimed he kept the money because his friend owed it to him. He consistently denied any connection to the crime or knowledge that the money was from the ransom. However, a search of his house revealed further incriminating evidence. There was a sketch of a ladder similar to the one found at the Lindbergh home. There was also Condon's telephone number and address. A piece of wood discovered in the attic of the home was determined to be an exact match to that used in the ladder found at the scene of the crime. He was, as we know, later found guilty and executed despite his appeals. Theories that promote Hauptmann's innocence focus on the alleged inadequacy of police work at the crime scene, Lindbergh's interference in the investigation, inadequacy of Hauptmann's lawyers, and weaknesses in the witnesses and physical evidence. Some believe that Lindbergh himself was actually to blame for his son's death, the result of a prank gone wrong. Criminal defense attorney Gregory Algren suggests Lindbergh climbed up a ladder and brought his son out of a window, but dropped Charlie, killing him, and so hid the body in the woods, then covered up the crime by blaming Hauptmann. I have to admit this sounds a little far-fetched to me, but we do see evidence of Lindbergh's alleged pranks in the book, so who knows. Ultimately, though, even if Hauptmann was indeed guilty, it brings up the question of how he could have known that Charlie would be in the house the day of the kidnapping. The author speaks about this at the end of the book. How could Hauptmann, who lived in the Bronx, have known that the family would be staying in New Jersey on that particular night? Hence, the suspicion that someone in the house must have been involved. The author makes it clear that this book is not a work of investigative nonfiction, and for the record, the author states that she believes Hauptmann to have been guilty. She admits that she has no idea if Ollie Whately liked cricket, but in the book she very much decides that he does, and she uses that to cast suspicion on whether Whately was involved. In the book, Whately speaks of a famous cricket player named G.A. Faulkner. On May 1st, 1933, as we know, a man gave his name as J.J. Faulkner and exchanged $2,980 in gold notes used in the ransom. This man was never identified, and his handwriting did not match the accused Hauptmann's. So in real life, we have no idea who this person's identity is, but in the book, the author basically insinuates that it could be Whately, the family's butler, because of his fictional love of cricket and the famous cricket player G.A. Faulkner. He then used a similar name, J.J. Faulkner, to exchange the money that he got as part of being in collaboration with the kidnapper. The idea is floated around that perhaps he didn't realize that they meant to actually kidnap the child, and certainly not kill him. It's kind of insinuated in the book, if I remember correctly, that the kidnappers did not intend to kill Charlie, but it was probably done as an accident, and the whole plan kind of fell through at that point, and that death probably occurred when they were taking him out of the window. They could have dropped him when they were on the ladder, and so he was dead very early on, is the theory in the book. Regardless, in real life, there is no evidence to suggest that Whately liked cricket or that he is the man who exchanged those bills. However, interestingly enough, one thing that is true is that Whately did give tours of the home, and he did give one such tour to Henry Johnson, a Scandinavian sailor that was briefly involved with Betty, who was eventually cleared of suspicion but deported. So Betty and Henry Johnson have a romance in the book that apparently they also had in real life. Henry is therefore suspected briefly before he's finally cleared, but he is deported back to his home. The fact that Whately did give tours in real life is very suspicious. It would allow somebody who intended to carry out a kidnapping to know the location of the rooms within the house. They'd know where Charlie's room was, which is another thing that would be random, like how would Hauptmann know which room to go to with the ladder? It would be explained if he learned that through one of Whately's tours that he gave of the house. That doesn't necessarily mean that Whately was directly involved with the kidnapping, but it does mean that he may have inadvertently allowed it to happen. Either way, we just don't know. All of the major events of Betty's life as related in the book are based in fact, including how she came to work for the Lindberghs, her time spent in Maine, her movements the day of the kidnapping, media coverage, her role in identifying Charlie's body, and testifying in the trial. The man she dated in Detroit, William Kautz, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. His name has been changed in the book to avoid confusion with her brother, who was also named William. This man was not appreciably older than her, and he claimed they broke up due to her high standards. Her reasons for the breakup are roughly verbatim from the police interviews that we read in the book. Betty also did work for the Lindberghs after the new baby was born, but it didn't last long. Her brother did die in a horrible accident while she was in Maine. Lindbergh's character sticks closely to reported fact. He held and promoted some repulsive views during the rise of the Nazis and the subsequent war, and as I mentioned earlier, we do see some evidence of the pranks that he allegedly might have played in the book. In 1935, Betty Gow did return to Scotland, where she lived the rest of her life. In 1993, she was apparently interviewed by a Lindbergh biographer named A. Scott Berg, who told her that Anne Morrow Lindbergh sent her regards. This news allegedly made Gow burst into tears because decades earlier she had written to the Lindberghs and they had never replied. She believed they blamed her for what had happened to Charlie. Betty Gow continued to work throughout her life. Her last job was as a manager at Eileen Adair's dress shop. She never married or had children and died on July 16th, 1996, at the age of 92. So that is a very simplified version of events. There is a lot more that you can dive into if you are so inclined, but I hope it gives an idea of what this book is about and how the book did differ. For the most part, it was very historically accurate. I think it stayed true to the historical record. As for the book itself, some of the paragraphs were weird. There were often small, short paragraphs that skip from one scene to another with time breaks in between, and it's a bit disorienting at times. I found Betty's thought process was sometimes a bit confusing, kind of like Whiplash, the way that it was portrayed in this book. The book is written in first-person point of view, and so I again thought it didn't get too deep into what really happened. We're stuck with Betty's thoughts all the time, and I thought the book would explore more aspects of the crime a little bit. Instead, it focused more on the people involved, the human element, and how they were all affected, which is fine and even good, but I thought we would learn a bit more about the crime itself than we are told because it is so important. Obviously, the entire story revolves around this crime and what happened. So there you go. I hope that you got some value out of this video. Maybe you've learned something. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed, feel free to leave a like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future content. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!